And if it doesn't work, just shrug your shoulders and say, okay, that didn't work for me. I didn't like how it tasted. It made me gain weight. I'm going to try something else. So being more open and just allowing yourself to try things and not worry if it's right or wrong so much is a mindset that really helps. Because then you don't have that feeling like nobody wants to, even have themselves talk mean to themselves all the time. So they give up trying to eat well because they get tired of that mean voice. And if you take that mean voice out, well, then you can explore an awful lot of things.
And today I have with me Dr. Heather Awad, who's a menopause weight loss expert, family doctor, and certified coach who helps professional women in midlife and beyond lose weight for the last time. I can't tell you how excited I am to hear about that. So that we can, and I include myself in that category, live in the body that we want. She also hosts a podcast where she discusses weight loss, women's health, and food. Welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I want to jump right in and ask you one of the most important questions that I think when it comes to menopause, and that is there any part of our body that's not impacted when we go through the menopausal changes?
No, they all are. We have estrogen receptors and testosterone receptors from head to toe. So it's our hormones are throughout our body. So they definitely affect our whole body. And a funny story, I watched that beautiful documentary that PBS has, The M Factor, about menopause. And there was a dentist on there saying that, you could lose a tooth because of menopause. And I thought, even as doctors, we sometimes forget that the mouth is part of the body. So yes, absolutely everything.
Absolutely. And I'd love to hear a little bit. We're going to dive deep into the menopause changes, but can you tell us a little bit about what your practice was and where you're based? Tell us just a little bit about that. And I think you've made a pretty significant transition from how a lot of people see medicine has to be practiced to a new way that's really outside the box that excites me. And I think other mid to late career physicians, as we're trying to really rediscover, even with the changes in our body, how we view ourselves and our careers.
Sure. Yeah, this midlife is actually a great time for reinvention, adding something new. You're at the top of your game in a lot of ways. So it is an exciting time. I am a family doctor in Minnesota, as you said. So I was rounding in nursing homes, and really my own weight loss journey is what kind of inspired me to do this. So I was, eating pretty healthy-ish, and then just noticed that I just started to gain weight, and it was mostly belly fat, and it just went up and up. And then the old ways that you could just kind of get that under control in the past just didn't work at all. And I tried some actual diets, which most of them made me feel sick. So I quit them. I did one of those app-based programs where you muscle your way down. And then I rebounded even higher. So at 50, I was devastated because I thought my body is broken. As a doctor, I thought of diabetes and heart disease, these diseases I was going to get. And then I thought, I'm going into menopause here. There's got to be something special about this. So the answer was actually in insulin resistance. And so I dove into that stuff. And then I, career-wise, decided to get some coaching at that time because the pandemic was just ending. And I thought, I really want to look at my life. Well, in doing that coaching, I also discovered that I was eating my feelings. So between learning about what the science part and the nutrition part was, and then allowing myself to feel my feelings instead of eating my feelings, weight loss got really simple and easy. So I lost 27. I'm not worried about it coming back on. And this is the work I do with other professional women. And I work with professional women because we talk about work and our busy lives and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting point, this pivot that happens in midlife, right? And the accompanying hormonal changes that are often not explained. So I'm 52, so we're probably somewhat close in age.
Mm-hmm.
I did my medical training in the 90s, which I imagine you did as well, medical school and residency. I'm an internist. And when I started going through the menopause transition, I had to pause and really recognize that how little and how misinformed I really just thought, and maybe you shared this, and I'd love to hear that it was just sort of less estrogen.
Yeah.
And these FSH and LH went high, and maybe your bones thin a little, but otherwise, and you didn't sleep, and maybe you had some hot
Yeah.
flashes, the vasomotor pieces. But the metabolic components really were unclear to me. And certainly the uniqueness that happens with this transition. So I'd love it. We may have some listeners that aren't as familiar with metabolic disease. What exactly is insulin resistance, and why would it be so pivotal, and why would it be coming up at this time when hormones are shifting?
Right. Well, everything you said is so true, that it is a unique time, and we're having a complete phase change of our whole body, which is, not explained as well as it could be in our, from our medical training or from our families. So when our estrogen starts to drop, we get more insulin resistant. And so what happens is our insulin doesn't work as well. So it doesn't process the glucose that our body makes food into. And so there's more of it hanging around then as well. So this does put us at higher risk of diabetes after menopause, does put us at risk of heart disease. We kind of think of men being the ones that have heart attacks, but once we hit that menopause transition, we bump up into that category as well. And this is from insulin resistance as well. So when we look at that, the problem is that one of the things that insulin does is it tells our body to store fat. So that part works just fine. So it's hanging around at high levels. And so then we start to get this central body fat. And so that is kind of the whole cycle that happens at that time that doesn't get very well explained to us.
Yeah. And then does that fat tend to have an inflammatory component to it as well, in some sense, where if we have fat there versus other places, it might increase our risk of stroke or heart attack versus, say, just jelly arms or,
Yes,
pear-shaped bottom? There's something particular about that visceral fat, isn't there?
there is. So a lot of people will notice that they used to be kind of a pear shape and now they start to look more like an apple, right? So that belly fat that we're concerned about is actually deep. So it goes back from our belly back and wraps around our organs and is an inflammatory fat. So it does come with more health risks.
Yeah, I think that, again, we just understand so little about that. And isn't it true that you encounter a lot of women for whom their diet may have been, as you say, I love it, healthy-ish, meaning like, grains, appropriate proteins, maybe low fat. And I always like to lament that anyone who's not in a surgical or chemotherapeutic menopause is likely a Gen Xer, right? So
Right.
there's just the way the decades kind of spell out. And we were part of what I call the Snackwell generation, right?
Yes. Yes.
So
Where everything had to be low fat or no fat, and fat was bad.
that
Yeah.
was bad. And granted, I think we're still figuring out the best macros for each person and,
Hmm.
what that ratios and how to conceptualize it. But I actually think our generation has a fair amount of coaching that's needed around healthy fats. What do you think?
Definitely. Because I think people will say, oh, yeah, that low fat thing was just an 80s thing. And we now know that fats are fine, except that nobody has actually changed what they're doing. Right. So, I think we do need to look at what our healthy fats are. So, olive oil, avocado oil. We can fight about canola oil. Your cardiologist will tell you that it's okay, even though it's highly processed. But avocados and nuts and nut butters and olives themselves, those things have healthy fats in them. They don't raise our blood sugar. They don't raise insulin. So they're actually part of the Mediterranean diet as well. So these fats are actually helpful for us to be healthier and to make weight loss easier if that is someone's goal. The things we need to watch for are the saturated fats. Of course, we all know that the trans fats, if you see that on anything, you don't want to eat that. But the saturated fats, we need to get more careful about at this menopause transition. So cheese, butter, the higher fat dairies, those are things we need to watch because, and cream, right? Because those are also going to increase our risk of cardiovascular disease.
Yeah, I think the average person, I often wonder, again, coming back to our Gen X reality, right? So we didn't grow up with TikTok or Instagram or even really Pinterest. We grew up with our moms in the kitchen, cookbooks. And I always like to remember my formative years and I think we both share a love of cooking, which I'm going to want to dive into here in a minute. But I still remember, is my mom wasn't a big cook. So her mom, a 50s mom, big cook, didn't let my mom in the kitchen. So then when my mom came through, she wasn't as excited about cooking. So my dad did a little bit more. But when it came time for me to learn like culinary techniques, and we had a home ec course, and I remember that I learned to make toast points. So white bread toast points with cream chip beef. This was basically the sum total of the experience. And I always like to just lament that, where the coaching piece is so relevant, because we have these unconscious stories that inform us about fat, about what equals a healthy diet. One thing I see a lot, which I'm curious how you think this factors into the menopause transition in terms of meal planning, is decision fatigue, right? So here you are, 50 approximate years old, and you've probably planned 365 times 50 times 2 or 3, meals per day. Let's not say under 10 or under 7 you planned meals. So here you are, thousands of meals in, and you're kind of looking at your body saying, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm doing it right, but something in my body is telling me I'm over-consuming something, or I'm not moving properly. So what are some of the early coaching paradigms that you find you have to unravel with some of your clients when you're in there doing that work? Because getting on a meal app or getting a meal plan or getting a food service sent to you might surely get the macros closer to what is ideal to the menopause transition. But as you said, the coaching piece ends up being just as, if not more, essential in unraveling some of the stress around eating and beliefs around eating. So what are some of the things that you find you initially end up discovering that's kind of a common thread?
Well, a lot of us have this idea we're doing it right or we're doing it wrong. And so when we're doing it right, it's fine. And when we're doing it wrong, we beat ourselves up for it. And really, when you want to nourish yourself, and if you want, to go on a weight loss journey, the thing that will help you the most is to be kind to yourself and experiment and be open to trying something. And if it doesn't work, just shrug your shoulders and say, okay, that didn't work for me. I didn't like how it tasted. It made me gain weight. I'm going to try something else. So being more open and just allowing yourself to try things and not worry if it's right or wrong so much is a mindset that really helps, because then you don't have that feeling like nobody wants to, even have themselves talk mean to themselves all the time. So they give up trying to eat well because they get tired of that mean voice. And if you take that mean voice out, well, then you can explore an awful lot of things. So that's really beautiful.
Yeah.
We do in our culture do a lot of eating our feelings. And I enjoy the comedian Jim Gaffigan, because in every one of his specials, there's 1 or 2 points where he says something like, well, this happened and I felt terrible. And then I just ate pizza until I didn't feel terrible anymore. But that is that is a common thread in our culture. Thinking about perhaps I could look, name the feeling that I'm having. I could notice what it feels like. A lot of times, even bad feelings just go away.
Mm,
And some people find that they're also eating good feelings. So, just noticing that food doesn't have to be a part of the feelings.
mm.
That can just be something you experience on their own. Those are probably two big threads I find for the coaching piece.
Wow. Gosh, there's so much to unpack in both of them. I love it.
Yeah.
So, if we look a little bit about our judgment around food, I really appreciated your point, which is inevitably we find ourselves shaming or judging or stepping
Yeah.
away from a compassionate view of ourselves because we are giving a dualistic thought, whether it's good or bad. And I sometimes wonder how much energy we're actually spending at every meal
Mm.
looking at it saying, is this good? Is this bad? Versus saying, I've come to the table, I'm going to have this experience with this meal and with this food. And maybe tomorrow I'll notice I'm a little more sluggish or a little more swelling in my feet. Or
Ah,
tomorrow my bowels moved super normal. I feel light. I feel creative. As opposed to saying it's all or none. Because sometimes a meal could be fabulous, but there was a really stressful event and we didn't sleep through the night. And so
yeah.
I think the way that we metabolize food and assimilate and integrate what we've put into our body is also contingent deeply on our perceptions of ourself in the midst of that. And I love that insight of just sort of being able to step back and say, what if we weren't judging food and
At all.
at all? And so I'm curious to segue from that. How do you help people who make these changes? They're really excited about their new relationship with food. And then they go home for the holidays, or they are
Yeah.
out to lunch with their family, or they have friends over for tea. And someone looks down at their plate and says, oh, that's good, or that's bad, or you eat so good, or why are you eating that? Like, what do you
Yeah.
do when you find yourself there?
Right. We're tribal in some sense, right? And when we lived in caves, if we didn't do what the group said, we could die. So that's real. Our brain goes there, right? That we have to go along with it. But at some point, it's helpful to stop and think about, what do I really want? And am I going to allow other people to decide what that is? There's a fasting group that I love, who what they say in their fasting group is fasting is Fight Club. We don't talk about Fight Club. So we don't talk about fasting. So one of the things I do recommend is, if you are changing your habits, if you have someone that you'd like to share that with, great. But you already know there are some people in your life that are going to get into a debate or judge or talk about what you're eating. And there's no need to talk to them about it at all. You can change the subject. You can excuse yourself and go to the bathroom. So there are ways to deal with what happens with other people. We spend a lot of time on this in my group, honestly, because some people have food pushers, some people have food as love people, some people have people that want to be the one that scoops the food onto your plate, and some people who just want to talk a lot about big stories about food. So we kind of do that individually. But there are definitely ways to get around that, just by examining what's there, who the people are, how they usually act. Sometimes it's just a matter of saying, of course they're going to say that. Of course they're going to make some judgment about what's on my plate,
Mm-hmm.
because they always do. And then accepting that, then we can decide what we want our response to be.
I love that. And I think that's such a beautiful example of the coaching models that are out there that really say, I like Mel Robbins' new book, Let Them, the
Yeah,
notion that she's been putting out, sort of saying, let them be who they are. Let them say what we know they're always going to say. Let
right.
them put that, thing into, but I think the hardest one is honestly when someone else serves you the scoop onto the plate, or you're a guest
Yes.
in someone's home and they're saying, you're not eating my food. And I actually have some long COVID complications just to make everything super fun, that I
Yeah.
developed some allergies and weird sensitivities because I have some gastroparesis. So I can't really eat
Mm,
all the foods I used to eat. And it's very difficult when I'm a guest in someone's home sometimes and they say, why aren't you enjoying my food? And I try to say, well, this, because they haven't had a shared experience. And for a long time, I just sort of held that. And I was like, I'm sorry, I'm a little broken, like all that
yeah.
internal dialoguing that we give
Right.
ourselves that's not helpful, it's not useful, versus really applying the coaching model and sort of saying, before I go in, I know they're going to be upset when I tell them I can't eat their food, but
Yeah.
let them be upset. I know they're going to
Right.
judge when I eat a cookie in front of them. Let them, because I want to enjoy this cookie. Or maybe you are sugar free, however one is
Hmm.
designing what feels normal and right. And I think this relationship to nourishment is so complicated, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious about, I want to dive back into the feelings piece, but what do you think in your experience with the coaching and the group work that you do? What do you think are the barriers that women have to nourishing themselves? Let's say not just physically, but emotionally or spiritually, depending on their own framework.
Sure. I mean, some of it, I would say a big common one is people pleasing, which all humans have some aspect of this, but women are very socialized for that. And so that plays in. And it does feel like you're going to hurt the other person if you don't do what they want. And oftentimes that is not true or not big enough of a thing to actually worry about. So it's kind of getting around that and practicing little pieces, going in and eating what they tell you to eat the first time, and then just debriefing it and thinking about it after. The next time going in and not eating everything that they want you to eat. Another time going in and putting your hand over the plate when someone's holding up a spoon of food and seeing if they will actually pour it onto the back of your hand or if they'll pull it back. All these things actually just take a little practice
Mm,
and noticing how you can also still be a wonderful guest
right.
at someone's house. We've been talking about this a lot because at the time of this recording, it's holiday time and talking about events. And you think about the ways you're a good guest. You thank people for inviting you. You compliment the spread. What a beautiful table they have, the decorations. And these are all true. You're not making things up. You're not lying. These are true. And you show appreciation for the things that you are really appreciating.
Mm.
And then you eat what makes sense for you to eat.
Yeah. And I think this is something that we don't recognize, that unlearning people pleasing is like layers of an onion, right? There's layer one,
Yes.
and you don't ever eat a raw onion, right? You're never going to be just waking up one day and say, I'm done people pleasing. Today's the day. It
Right,
never
right.
happens again. We're good here. It's really a matter of sort of these micro decisions that you're making a
Yeah.
choice for yourself. So I often say, saying no to that means yes to you. And it can be done in a thoughtful and compassionate and thoughtful way. Sometimes I'll even say things like, it's just incredible. You put so much love into the food. I'd love a hug. Or is there another way we can share connection, because my digestion is so wonky right now? I'm not able to eat these foods. And so,
Yeah.
sometimes letting people know that you're open to, like you said, they're trying, their feelings are coming through the food. And not
Yeah.
everyone is going to do the inner work, right? Not everyone's going to get coaching. Some
Right.
people, that awareness is going to be really obscure. You might even say it to them directly. Have you ever thought about that the way you share food is a way you extend love? And there's other ways to share connection. And oh, then you realize, like, okay, tread lightly here,
Yes.
because not everyone necessarily wants coaching. Although, do you think, we're probably biased, but do you think everyone could benefit from some coaching at midlife?
I do, if they're open to it, of course.
Yeah,
Because there are some people who do not feel open to it and why bother then?
right.
But yeah, no, I do think it is helpful.
Um, I'd love it if you could share a little bit about your journey. So you mentioned that you had been eating healthy-ish, and then you started noticing I'm gaining some weight, and then you sort of yo-yoed a bit. Could you go into a little bit more detail about the changes that actually worked for you in terms of some
Yes.
of the unlearning you did, as well as some of the changes you made concretely in your diet?
Sure, sure. So I had to learn a little bit more about menopause nutrition in general. I was someone who was a thin child. And so I got away with a lot of sugar over the years. And that was probably my biggest problem at the menopause transition, at perimenopause. That added sugar really works against you. And the funny thing is that I'll talk to women and they'll say, well, I just have this little small calorie thing and this other little small calorie thing. But the added sugar thing just doesn't work great. So when you look at people who live in the blue zones, those people that live to have more people that live to be 100, they'll have dessert once or twice a week. And that's very different than how we view sugar in our lives. I would tend to have a little bit here and there pretty often, and then dessert. And so looking at having it when I want it, but only having it at the end of a meal so it didn't spike my blood sugar up high, and only having it a couple times a week, that made a big difference. The other thing that is countercultural, but is very 70s, when we did not have this obesity epidemic, is snacking and grazing are terrible if you have any kind of insulin resistance. So they're really terrible for women at perimenopause and beyond, because you end up kind of activating your whole digestive system. You have some blood sugar that goes up because you ate, the insulin goes up, and then so the insulin is saying, do not pull from fat stores, store fat. So I even have some clients who say, I'm eating healthy meals, but I'll find out that they walk through their kitchen and pop a couple of cherry tomatoes in their mouth. Seems healthy. Or the people that go and have nuts from the cupboard, seems healthy. But what they've done is, instead of allowing their digestive system to get quiet, allow that insulin to go low. That's the kind of situation we want, where our body will just pull fat for energy naturally. But what we're doing is keeping it active all the time, so we never pull fat. So getting rid of grazing and snacking also made a huge difference. I eat 3 meals. I almost never have a snack unless I've underfed myself at a meal and then I'm hungry. Then I will eat. But that is, it seems very simple. People do not believe me, but this is the way that a lot of people at midlife and beyond will lose weight, just by eating 3 meals and getting rid of snacking.
That's incredible. I'm going to highlight that. And I actually agree. Interestingly, my studies have included a deep dive into Ayurveda, which is the traditional healing system of India. And snacking is highly discouraged. There is a model in Ayurveda, sort of like digestive embers, if you will, like a fireplace. And the fire becomes very irregular if we don't allow fuel to burn down and then to be used. And
wow.
And I think a lot of us are guilty, shall I say, of not being sure how to handle the midlife stressors. So we're circling back here a little bit to the feelings piece.
Yeah.
So I love what you said at the beginning of the podcast, in the sense that often at this age, professional women who we both work with are at the top of their game, right? You have invested years of education, sometimes decades. You've been in practice, or you've, if you're in law or if you're in other, professions, you have developed to some degree of mastery in your field. And also, you typically have, now of course, everyone's a little different, aging parents. You're about to empty nest, or kids are definitely moving to college, juggling their own identity pieces, and you have this changing body. And I think all these polarities in which our cognitive load gets drawn into often sometimes leads to the inability to manage feelings and the intensity that a day is bringing. And I think sometimes that wander through the kitchen is sort of like a soothing maladaptive behavior, meaning like, I'm so stressed I can't handle this moment. And
Yeah.
also I have to keep going. I need a little energy. Let me just get a little bit of nibble because it's a release of stress, or it's a release
Mhm.
of tension. And what do you think of that? Do you think there's what drives us to do that grazing and snacking this is kind of how I see it, but I'm curious if that aligns with what you've seen with your clients.
I do. I do. And there's, sometimes what we'll do is we'll list out, what are 10 things I can do to comfort or soothe myself that have nothing to do with putting anything in my mouth. There's the long hug, which you can do with a human or an animal. You can actually even put both of your hands on your own chest.
Mm.
You hold that for more than 30 seconds and you'll get a surge of oxytocin. You'll feel better. Sometimes people will have like a certain sweater or a certain blanket they'll wrap themselves up in. I say this because it's winter in Minnesota,
Yes,
but
please.
when the weather is good or you're somewhere where it's nice, going out and standing on the ground,
Mm.
it's a big soother. You've changed your environment. You're standing in nature. And there are exercises that you can do too that are interesting, that are, kind of emotional regulation exercises. So there, you definitely want to have a list of go-tos that are different than walking through the kitchen.
Right. That awareness is probably one of the key features that people are somewhat mindlessly doing the grazing
Yes.
or the snacking. And we are a sort of emotion phobic culture, right? We
Yeah.
give names to emotions. Just like food, that's a good emotion or that's a bad emotion. And,
Yeah.
my mindfulness teachers and my Ayurvedic teachers always said, let the emotion flower, let the emotion come through. And I
Mm.
think I'll have to look for the science in this, but something recently came to my purview of 90 seconds, let the emotion flower.
Right.
Physiologically, some shifts happen, probably some neurologic phenomena. And then if we allow that, oh, this is a big feeling. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm angry about that thing my partner said yesterday, or I can't get that
Mhm.
raise I wanted. Why not? Or I put this thing out on social media if you're more active and no one liked it, or it didn't land the way I
Yeah.
thought it would. I feel like this journey of being human right now, it brings us into so many opportunities to dysregulate ourselves. And
Right.
we're maladaptively thinking that a little nibble will somehow create a shift in that state. And I think you've wisely brought in some grounding techniques. And sometimes I use the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, where you use the five senses. What are five things
Hmm.
you see, four things you hear, marching through
Yeah.
that. And I think that we have to accept that maybe the way we constructed our day to day with some of this emotion phobia and judgment, we're sort of in the eddies, the unconscious eddies of that in menopause. And
Yeah.
it's really a great opportunity for unlearning. And I'm curious what you see in terms of personal agency, manifestation of inner alignment and dreams that once they've engaged in this work and they've maybe shed some of the extra weight that's been leaving them feeling heavy
Yeah.
and not as good in themselves, do you see a sort of re-energized state where there's more
Oh, I do.
energy to go do the things you want to do and be the person
Yes,
you kind of always imagined you were?
I definitely do. I definitely do. It's funny because if you picture that you go to munch on food because of a feeling and then you get that dopamine hit, if instead you go somewhere and you stop and say, okay, I'm going to feel this feeling. And like you said, let it flower, notice it, name it. Then at that point in time, sometimes there's something to do about it. Sometimes it's just something to observe. But otherwise, we also push away the situation when we just eat it, right? So we start to notice things around us. Maybe there's something going on with my team that I manage at work. And I've been just eating this when actually, now that I'm noticing the feeling, I have something that I want to do about this. the other thing too is that with the weight loss, the way that I teach people to do it, when they're not eating in between meals, there's a lot of time there. 3 to 6 hours in the afternoon, people start to say, I don't know what to do with myself. And we're busy people, right? So I say, well, what was the thing that you were going to do if you only had time? Are you going, people take up hobbies, they write books, they knit sweaters, they, take on some educational thing, they look for advancement in their career. So all of a sudden you're like, I've got time to do this instead of feeling overwhelmed by so many things. There are definitely opportunities there. So, and when you are willing to feel your uncomfortable feelings, your joyous feelings, and all the ones in between, when you're willing to feel all of those, what really can you not do that you'd like to?
Yeah, I love that because I think we also have this unlearning, certainly our generation, that menopause is the fourth chapter, so to speak, that we are, we're going to be tired and worn out and overweight and on the road to some sort of life-limiting illness. And
Yeah.
I think we need to uncouple ourselves from that having to be the case. I mean, we can have a health span that's quite different from aging when we utilize principles of lifestyle medicine, which I'm sure you bring into your work and brought into your work. You mentioned to me that you enjoy culinary medicine. Tell me a little bit about any training you've done and what does that term mean to you? I know it means something a little different to everyone, but what does that term mean
Sure.
to you?
What it means to me is, as a doctor, teaching people kind of how to do the food, how to make food changes, including cooking. Before the pandemic, I used to volunteer in a teaching kitchen at the YMCA locally, and we would do recipes, and people would come in, and whoever wanted to come in, we would all cook it together, and that was really fun. Certain types of foods are difficult to cook unless you kind of have someone who shows you how. Certain kind of crusts, phyllo dough. We made spring rolls, which also, until the Vietnamese woman who was there who showed us how to use the rice paper, I did not know how to, if I had that in my house, I wouldn't know what to do with it. So that's really fun. With my groups, we end up doing a lot of sharing of recipes and talking about how to make things. I do, most of the people that I work with do eat meat, but we talk about eating a more plant-forward lifestyle, how to have more vegetables in the food we're eating, and also to have some vegetarian meals during the week. I eat meat, but I love cooking vegetarian food. So, that's, the thing I like to do. So I tend to do that more often. But that's what means to me for culinary medicine. I haven't done formal training. I did like the Healthy Kitchens, Healthy Lives conference. I got really inspired by that to just do more in my own community.
I think these teaching kitchens are, as we look at the term, doctor, docere, it means teacher and educator from the Latin. And this place we've gotten away from empowering people in a self-healing journey with more of the focus on pharmaceuticals or surgical or subspecialty evaluations, when
Yeah.
maybe there's a lot more agency to. And I will be the first to say that some women absolutely need hormone replacement. Like,
Yes.
no question, the quality of life is so profoundly impacted. But it may be that some of these lifestyle lanes could be used concurrently or prior to a trial with hormone replacement. I'm curious, though, you're not seeing patients anymore. Did you have that approach in your practice where you kind of looked at the lifestyle pieces pretty robustly? Because it's hard. We don't have time or energy or support to do that.
Right. There really isn't. And there's so little teaching about it as well in medical education for all the primary care people and the OBGYN people. So people are having to try to learn that now on their own. I mean, I think it's a yes and, right? Because even if you take hormone therapy for menopause, it's not going to fix everything. And there's going to be some ways that you want to nourish your body better. Like your brain is really going to do better if you eat good nutrition. Your belly is not only, I'm not even talking about weight loss, but how it feels is really going to feel better if you follow good nutrition. I have a lot of clients who say, I thought my knees hurting going down the stairs was just being 50. And now that I have cut out added sugar and don't eat so many of these refined flours, that has gone away and I have no pain. So, it's a yes and. I don't know if that woman took hormones or not for hot flashes or for bone health, but nutrition fixed, her knee pain.
Right. And it's interesting because I've definitely had, as you might imagine, in my work, many conversations with people who said no one ever really talked to me about food. They just assumed that if I was handed a
Yeah.
book or I would pay for a nutritionist or use an app, that would be adequate. And I always like to reflect and pause just for our listeners that it's incredibly powerful for a clinician like yourself to pause long enough to say, though I don't have time in this visit, I really want to stress to you the importance of finding good support to understand. And then once you did your coaching, you said, okay, folks, I've got to step all the way out of the model because I actually think the work I can do here is really taking people into a self-healing journey that's not medical in the classic sense.
Right.
And that's, as I understand it, that's the transition you fully made now. Is that right?
Yes, that's completely correct.
Yeah. And so if someone was working with you, they would go through
Mhm.
a one-to-one process or a group process. How do you like to deploy all this wonderful new knowledge that you have?
Sure, sure. I'm mostly doing it as a group program now, and people really like it because everyone is a special snowflake, but we do have a lot of things in common with our experience and our challenges at work and at home. So people do really love the group process. I do also see some people one on one because some people just come and tell me, I don't want that.
Yeah.
I just want to talk to you every week.
Yeah.
There are both of those choices.
I think it's so powerful to recognize the evolving group visit model. And a lot of us sort of
Hmm.
left practice before it was as becoming as prominent. But there is some really incredible data that's starting to emerge that just speaks to the synergy, the support, the intangibles of being in community, normalizing the
Yeah.
experience, allowing for vulnerability, feeling seen, creating emotional safety through the group facilitator actually has a therapeutic arm independent of the actual intervention, one might say, or the
Right.
coaching that's happening. And I find that to be fascinating, especially when the lifestyle medicine pillars include six of them, and one of them is community and connection.
Right.
And I'm curious, we're going to slowly wind down here. I have a couple more
Sure.
questions for you. One thing that I hear a lot, and I'd love to hear your perspective, or I get asked this a lot, which is, do you think eating alone is a good thing? Or maybe not a good thing, but if someone finds themselves often eating alone, is there something that they could do to integrate or think about that, for reflection? And also, when we're in community and sharing meals, do you think something intangible is happening then too?
I do. And some of it is I go back to the research on children and the family meal, right? The kids that have a family meal with that connection just tend to thrive on all levels. And as adults, we shouldn't forget what served us well as children. So I do think that there's some real intangibles that way. The funny thing is, though, with weight loss in an overeating culture, is that we tend to eat more when we eat with other people. So I do warn my clients that to remember to still pay attention that you don't overeat. We don't. It sounds silly, but it is a simple thing to say. Do not stuff yourself. Stop when you feel satisfied and don't have any more. You can put your napkin on your plate and enjoy the company because that part is important.
Mm.
There are people who eat alone all the time, and I think that's fine. I don't have an opinion about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think it's lovely to eat with other people, but I wouldn't want to say that eating alone is not a good thing.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
sometimes the pressures of preparing meals can be overwhelming for people. What are
Yeah.
some meal planning ideas that you offer? Do you enjoy an app, a cookbook? What's the direction you like to help people that way?
Yeah. We tend to look at some cookbooks, look at some online bloggers, because certain bloggers are especially good. We also share home recipes that fit kind of like, oh, I didn't realize this one thing I make is perfect for menopause, low in starch, good protein and lots of vegetables. So we do a lot of sharing there as well. Am I losing track of your
No,
question?
not at all.
Sorry.
I'm just thinking about the tips and tricks that you've kind of cultivated that
Oh,
really
sure, sure.
bring people into that relationship of. I find what I found is some people just feel a little isolated. They don't invite people over, or they don't connect with
Hmm.
people because they're in a sort of uncertainty or indecision fatigue of how do I plan a meal, or how do I make food for
Sure.
others or even for myself when I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I'm hungry. So I really love
Yeah.
that what I'm hearing you say is planning ahead, creating community that share your values, I think is so important.
Hmm.
And recognizing that occasionally you'll be in the company of others who do overeat. And I love that technique you said of just placing the napkin on the plate, which really does signal to all levels of self, we're done here.
I do want to add that I work with, busy professional women. So we talk about having 3 or 4 backups in the freezer, in the pantry, things that you can pull out pretty easily. A no sugar pasta sauce and hearts of palm, which is a vegetable for the noodles. That's in my pantry. I also have fixings for tacos that are readily available. I have chickpeas, which I can almost find anything to make out of those in my pantry. Even silly things like, when I'd be on my way home from work and we had nothing, I'd be like, okay, rotisserie chicken from the grocery store and that bag of green beans. I can cook those beans on the stove, and then I've got the chicken, and we've got dinner in less than 10 minutes. So having a good list of backup plans also really
It
helps.
does. And it's hard to do when you're hungry and tired, right? So this is
Yes.
where the coaching or having a game plan, sometimes even just on the fridge, I'll recommend what are your 10 go-tos that you know. So when the fridge
Yeah.
door is open and you're like, oh, there's nothing to eat. Or like you said, just having that little prompt or list that's handy that says, oh, yes, roasted chickpeas with broccoli and, a whole grain.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got a nice rounded meal that's maybe the broccoli's in the freezer and you pre-cooked some grains, however one is pulling it
Right.
together, but having that. And also, I think looking ahead in the week and saying, wow, Thursday is ballet, soccer, mom needs to go to the doctor, I've got a full panel, or, I'm super busy. I know we're going to be hungry on Thursday. Used to
Yeah.
be maybe we would order pizza out and just, everyone would overeat, but now we're going to do rotisserie chicken or whatever, style
Hmm.
has planned ahead a little. It's amazing what a little planning can do to make it easier. But I think, people
Right.
still, I don't know how to, the culture really makes it hard to plan for a lot of people. I don't see
It
it as
does.
often as I might like. Well, we're winding down here. I'd love to just gain a few other little facts about you. Tell us,
Hmm.
how do you like to de-stress? What's your favorite technique or a couple that you like to utilize?
I like to take my dog for a walk. That's a really big one for me because I get outdoors, and I have found that walking is a pretty big de-stressor for me, getting outside. Other things that I like to do to de-stress I do like to do breathing exercises. I find those very meaningful and are fast. So sometimes you're going meeting to meeting and you don't have a lot of time. So I love to do 4-7-8 breathing or box breathing or something like that. I've been learning, I was talking about uh, emotional regulation exercises. I've been learning more about doing things where your hands and feet cross the midline, that this does something for your brain for emotional regulation. So I've been trying to experiment with just swishing my arms around and seeing how I feel after that. Lots of different things, but because I help other people with this, I love to try new things.
Yeah, you have a very adventurous spirit, and it takes a lot of courage to make the changes you've made. And I'm curious, so it's middle of winter here in Minnesota. It's going to be a little chillier. What do you like to do in the summer once the weather opens up a bit? Is there a particular pastime you have in the summer?
Yeah. We have so many lakes in Minnesota. Everyone goes to the lakes, and I like to swim. Some of my family likes to go fishing, but just getting into the water, really therapeutic, really fun. And I bring it up because sometimes people from other states will say, you go swimming? You're a grown up. Yeah, we all swim. It's very fun.
I'm so delighted to hear about all the ways that you're not just teaching and sharing, but living into it for yourself. I always feel that energy, the vitality, the excitement really shines through for people that aren't just saying, do as I say, not as I.
Yeah.
This deep engagement with understanding it first for yourself and then passing all this wisdom on. I'm curious how people could work with you or how they could find you online. And we'll link all of this in our show notes.
Thank you. I'm easy to find on social media by my name, but also you can go to my website, heatherawadmd.com, and there are buttons there that can help us connect.
Beautiful. And if someone did connect with you, I understand they could experience a real results strategy session. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. Yeah. So if you go to the website and there's a button that says, I want to know more, it will connect you to a calendar to have a real results strategy session. And in that, I usually listen to a person's weight loss story and I give them their next two best steps. And it's been a wonderful thing to offer people. Everyone who does it says, oh, you gave me some really good things to try. And then at that point in time, if someone wants to work with me, we talk about that as well.
Well, I can tell just from our conversation that you're filled with so many good tips and ideas that I can't imagine not having a couple of interesting reflections after a conversation with you. So, Dr. Awad, thank you so much for joining us on our new podcast, Roots of Healing, with myself. And I'm really looking forward to sharing our episode with everybody.
Thank you. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you for listening to this week's Roots of Healing, the podcast where we uncover the stories, insights, and visionary ideas shaping the future of lifestyle and integrative medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Siri Chand Khalsa. Please note this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. The views expressed by our guests are their own and do not constitute medical advice. Always consult your healthcare provider for personal medical concerns. Please subscribe and share with friends.